أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. My dear elders, brothers, youngsters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have gathered here tonight for our Thursday weekly lectures. But more importantly, it's the third night of Sha'ban, which is the day of the Wilada of our third holy Imam, Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So felicitations to the 12th holy Imam, the Imam of the time, and felicitations to all the mu'mineen around the world on this auspicious day. 23rd February also is the day when my late father passed away in the year 2000, Marhum Bona Ali Sharif. Most of you might have heard his name. So before we go ahead, I would request all of you to remember him with the Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. So the topic for today that must have been given to you all, the untraceable ghost. Most of you must have done a Google search. It's very difficult to keep things undercover. But we'll come to the topic later on. But I want to take you through a timeline from the 1980s, and I want you to pay attention because it's very relevant to what is happening in the world just now as far as politics is concerned, especially the Islamic world. So as you know, in 1982, the Israelis invaded South Lebanon. 1983, April of 1983, there was a bomb attack on the American embassy in Beirut, which totally damaged the embassy, and it also happened to be a CIA unit within the embassy, so that also got destroyed. So in the same year, October, the Americans sent a person by the name of William Buckley to come to Beirut and set up a new CIA unit which was destroyed in the bomb attack. But what happened was this person's name was known to the IRGC. How? With the secret documents that they had obtained from the spy den, the American embassy in Iran, which was taken over by the students. So the classified documents were all shredded during that time, but they managed to get those documents together, and this person's name was there in that list. So the Lebanese militia or the Shias of Lebanon, when they heard about this man, William Buckley, a plan was made and he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped by the Lebanese Shia. This is October of 1983. October of 1985, of course, this William Buckley was killed by his captors. Either he was killed or he died a natural death. It's not known, but they never found his body. Some say he was buried. They allege that he was taken to Iran and killed there and whatever, but bottom line is he was killed. So taking you back a little bit, October of 1983 again, a suicide bomber drove into an army barracks in Beirut again. This time, and it was early in the morning or at dawn, and the soldiers were all sleeping, and the whole building just collapsed with the impact of the bomb. 60 French soldiers, 240 American soldiers died in that bomb attack. It was one of the worst casualty count that the Americans have had ever in their history. 240 soldiers in one day. And because of that, they withdrew from Beirut. 1985, a TWA flight number 847, was hijacked by militants from Lebanon again. And again, it was the Shias of Lebanon. There was an American SEAL, Navy SEAL in that flight who was killed. Only one person died. So he was killed. The rest were released. But there was a bargain. The purpose of hijacking this plane was that you release, so the Israelis were told that we'll release all the passengers on this plane only if 700 Shia prisoners are released from Israeli jails. And the Syrians mediated in this deal, and those 700 were released. 700 Shias were released, the passengers were released. There was one casualty, this one American Navy SEAL who was killed on this flight. Between 1985 and 1990, so 1985 and 1990, there were almost 44 kidnappings in Beirut. And these people who were kidnapped were used as a bait to release prisoners from Israeli jails or American prisoners, and some of them were killed. So Beirut in the early 80s, 70s was known as the mini Paris. It was so westernized, the dressing, the living standards, the food in Lebanon. It was known as the mini Paris. People from the Arab world would go to Beirut to holiday. And some of our elders who might have gone to Beirut during those times, it was unbelievable. It was an Islamic country, supposed to be an Islamic country, but very, very modern, no hijab. And some parts of Beirut are still like that till today. So it was being referred as a mini Paris. But during this time, 1982, 85 onwards, they started calling Beirut the Wild, Wild West Beirut. Wild, Wild West Beirut. It became so notorious, and they were all scared to go there. In the year 2000, so 82, they entered South Lebanon, the Israelis. In the year 2000, the Israelis were forced to withdraw from South Lebanon. And this was a big victory for Hezbollah. 2006, in the year 2006, an Israeli convoy came very close to the Lebanese border, South Lebanese border. And there was a cross-border ambush on this Israeli convoy. Reports say 8 soldiers were killed, 2 were taken as hostage. So whether they were alive or it was just the bodies that were taken. But this led to the 33-day famous war, 33-day war of 2006. On the 33rd day, there was a resolution, United Nations resolution, and both sides respected the resolution, and there was a ceasefire. But behind the scenes, there was so much happening. And this is one that Israelis really pushed for. They really wanted this resolution to go through. They have not respected other resolutions in history. But this was one resolution that they asked for, and they respected it, and they were really asking for a ceasefire, wanting this war to end. And this was again a big victory for Hezbollah. February 12th, 2008, so 2 years after this 33-day war, February 12th, 2008, in a locality of Damascus, a middle-class locality of Damascus, which is called Kafr Susa. So Kafr Susa was in the news just 2-3 days back. If you have been following the news, after the earthquake in Syria, aid started following in, but Israelis attacked Damascus with missiles. And the area which was attacked was Kafr Susa. Now some might feel it's a coincidence, but it looks like it's an active area, and that's why they attacked it. They had some intelligence report that there was some meeting going on, and they attacked it. But in the same locality, on February 12, 2008, there was a meeting that happened in a restaurant between Palestinians, Iranians, and Lebanese. And at around 10 p.m., one man walked out of the restaurant, and as he approached his car, which happened to be a Pajero or SUV or whatever, a bomb was detonated, and this one person was assassinated. And within a short time, the news spread around that this was none other than Hajj Imad Mughniyeh, who was killed on this day of February 12th, 2008. So his death anniversary was just a few days back. I thought you might have had a clip, so I asked Ali several times that was he discussed or not. He told me no, so I thought I'll take up this topic and discuss something about this great man. He was known as Ridwan, Hajj Ridwan, which was his name, and he's always been referred as Hajj Ridwan. So the Americans and the Mossad finally got their man. They got the man. After 25 years of this chase, and the CIA, after so many years, admitted to have taken part in assassinating him. And when they were asked, why did you do that? So they say, at that time it was attributed to Mossad. The Mossad of Israel was blamed for his assassination. But a few years later, the CIA said, no, we were also involved. And why was the CIA involved? And they take you back to 1983. They say that CIA embassy demolition and Buckley, who was kidnapped, the man behind all these. So the whole timeline that I took you through, the demolition of the American embassy, the bombing, the killing of those soldiers, 60 French, 240 Americans, the hijacking of the TWA flight, and then the kidnappings of those 24 people between 85 and 90, and they're being used to get prisoners released, withdrawal of the Israelis from South Lebanon, 2006, the famous victory in the 33-day war. One man who was active in all these operations was Haji Imad Mughniyeh. And they called him the Untraceable Ghost, because they had opportunities to arrest him so many times that he would just slip out. And most of the time they didn't even have traces of him, because he would not give press conferences. Nobody had his photographs, so nobody knew what he looked like. He would change cars on a daily basis. He would change houses on a daily basis. And there were times when they were tracking him and they knew where he was. So he was very close to the American embassy in Paris once. And they tracked his conversations on the phone. And the CIA came running and told the French authorities, please arrest him. And the French said, no, we can't arrest him because at present we are bargaining with him to get French prisoners released. So we can't get him arrested. And he slipped out. The next time he was on a flight which was going by Saudi, the Americans told the Saudis, please, he's in transit, arrest him. Saudis said, no, we can't arrest him. Americans came in, they wanted to come in a flight, and the Saudis did not give them landing rights, and Imad Mughniyeh slipped out again. There were times when they were chasing him, he was in West Africa. There are times they were told that he was in Sudan, Khartoum, and the moment they tried to trace him, he just slipped out. So that's why they gave him this title of the Untraceable Ghost, or they also called him the Fox. And we'll see what the CIA said about him later on. So just a brief biography of this man. He was born in 1962 in a poor locality of Beirut or of Lebanon, December of 1962. His father's name was Fayaz, a very brave man. He's been interviewed several times. And his mother, who died in his lifetime, or he died after he was martyred, I think. So at a very young age, 14, 15, he started training, military training, and at that time, Yasser Arafat was very active against the Israelis. So he joined Yasser Arafat amongst his elite Fatah soldiers. So he was a sniper, and he was hired, and he was with Yasser Arafat. And then the Amal movement of Ayatollah Musa Sadr came in Lebanon. So he joined that. And that's where he came into contact with Mustafa Shamran. Once we had discussed about Mustafa Shamran, his biography, the first American defense, the first Iranian defense minister, who was a scientist in the United States, a nuclear physicist, if I'm not mistaken. And then he went to Egypt. He came to Lebanon, and he was trained in guerrilla warfare in Egypt, and then came to Lebanon to train. That's where he came into contact with Imad Mughniyeh. And Imad Mughniyeh's mother says that Haji Imad idolized Shamran. So whatever he knew, whatever he learned, and his ideals were all based on Shamran. He took him as a role model. So you see the small seeds that were planted then, the fruits appeared later on. 1981, after the Iran-Iraq war started, Arafat sided with Saddam. For some reason, he had association with the Ba'ath Party. So then Imad Mughniyeh left him, and he joined the security group of Ayatollah Fadlullah. So he was in charge of Ayatollah Fadlullah's security, because there was an assassination attempt on him. So with him, he went for Hajj, and that's where he got the title of Haji Imad Mughniyeh or Hajj Ridwan. 1984, that's where he joined Hezbollah. And this was the turning point of this man. So he got associated with Sayyid Abbas Musavi, whose death anniversary I think is it's in February, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah. So they're good friends, comrades, and they built up Hezbollah together. In one of his interviews, Haji Imad says that during those years, 82, 85, there were fears that Hezbollah will break up. There was so much pressure on this group that we thought this group, whoever is fighting, everybody will just be killed and this group will just die down. But then later on he says, now we have reached a stage. I don't know what year this interview was given. Very rare interview of Haji Imad. You can see it online. He says, we've built up Hezbollah to an extent that it's impossible now to eradicate it. It's impossible to eradicate this group now. Why? Because we've built the values around. So we have our own schools now. Our youths have been educated with Hezbollah ideals. So whatever you do, these values have already spread around. And they've not been restricted to the boundaries of Lebanon, but now they've spread to Palestine, they've spread to Yemen, they've spread to Syria. So whatever we see happening today in the world, be it in Yemen, be it in Syria, but more importantly in Palestine just now. What's happening in Gaza and West Bank. These youths were trained by Hezbollah, and one of the main architects of this training was Haji Imad Mughniyeh. He had made it his goal that we are going to free Palestine. And he put in all his efforts, he risked his life. So you can imagine a person who changes houses on a daily basis, a person who doesn't have clothes, who doesn't have a group that he's associated with, always on the move. He must have sacrificed his life, his family, and so much of his youth just to live by his values and to achieve what he had set out for. This is truly a lesson for us. Robert Bayer, who was a CIA agent, he says Mughniyeh was probably the most intelligent, most capable operative we've ever come across. So the CIA are admitting this, that he was the most intelligent and most competent agent that they've ever come across. CIA has spread around around the world. They've dealt with the Russians, they've dealt with the Cubans, and you name it. But they say by far this man was the smartest of them all. They say we just couldn't track him as he never used the radio or telephone, and he changed cars and houses continuously. At the end he says, I wish I could meet this man. Although he was my enemy, but I wish I could meet him and just get to know what was going on in his mind. I just wanted to know his thoughts. This is a CIA agent saying. And Haji Qasim Soleimani, Shaheed, says, he gives out the secret. He said, Imad Mughniyeh was not a guerrilla war specialist, but his secret was in his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was his sincerity that took him so far. At a very young age, he achieved so much. It was his relationship with Allah, his sincerity. He says, Ridwan, that is Haji Imad, was never heard of boasting of his capabilities in front of the Hezbollah soldiers. None of his soldiers, none of his fellow soldiers or army men or people who are under him, you never hear it from them that they heard him boasting about himself. He was always humble. They say he was so humble that people who saw him in Syria thought he was a driver of the Iranian embassy. The Iranian embassy in Damascus. So when people saw him and they saw him once or twice, they thought he's the driver. He was so humble, not knowing that he was the mastermind of what was going around him. He was so simple and humble. And to us, he is a manifestation of the few Quranic verses. And I think it's important to mention these Quranic verses. The Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم محمد رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم. This verse says, it's chapter 48, verse number 29. It says, Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah, and those with him are firm of heart against the unbelievers, but compassionate amongst themselves. When they are amongst themselves, they're very compassionate with each other. But they're firm of heart when it comes to the unbelievers. تراهم ركعا سجدا يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا. Coincidentally, Ridwan is also mentioned. You will see them bowing down, prostrating themselves, seeking grace from Allah and His pleasure. Always seeking the pleasure of Allah. This was his secret, and that's why they gave him this title, Ridwan. Always seeking the pleasure of Allah. سِيمَاهُمْ فِي وُجُوهِهِمْ مِنْ أَثَرِ السُّجُودِ. Their marks are in the faces because of the effect of prostration. It is not the mark of sajda, but the humility that you see in them. They prostrate in sajda but it makes them humble in life. So you see that sign on their faces. No wonder people would think he is a driver, but yet he's such a great personality. So this is one verse. The second verse, chapter 8, verse number 65. Ya ayyuhan Nabi, Prophet is told, Harrid al-mu'minina al-qital. O Prophet, urge the believers to war. In yakun minkum ishuruna sabiruna yaghlibu mi'atayn. If there are 20 patient ones of you, Prophet is told, if you have 20 patient sabir soldiers, they shall overcome 200 of the enemies. So the ratio is 1 to 10. One of the Prophet's soldier who is devout, who is a sabir, who is patient, is equivalent to 10 from the enemy side. وَإِن يَكُن مِّنكُم مِّئَةً يَغْلِبُ أَلْفًا مِّنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. And if you have 100 of them, they should overcome 1,000. So this is the ratio. People who are devout soldiers of the Prophet, their powers increased so much that they were equivalent to 10 of the enemy. This was during those times. But we see this equation happening in our times also. Imad Mughniyeh, Shaheed Haji Imad Mughniyeh, Haji Ridwan was one of them. The enemies were looking for him because he was equivalent to a whole army. He was a one-man army. Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah says, when it came to planning of operations, he was very particular about the details. And most of the time he would be there on the ground, supervising. So even in the 2006 war, just the kidnapping of those 2 soldiers in that operation, he personally participated right to the end. He would not leave it to others. He was always on the battlefield, but very powerful, equivalent to so many more of the enemies. So this is another thing that we can take from his life. One, of course, is to have the proper values, standing up for the oppressed. Secondly, being so devout that Allah increases our capacity. Sabirun. Thirdly is the brotherhood that they had. Ruhama bainahum. It was an amazing brotherhood between Haji Qasim, Haji Imad Mughniyeh and Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah. There was an amazing bond between these 3. And you can see the pain when they part with each other. The times when they were together, the things that they achieved. You can go through the interview of Haji Qasim when he talks about the 2006 war, as to how these 3 bonded together, how they nearly got killed, how they ran away. It's amazing, the brotherhood that they had. Ruhama bainahum, and the brotherhood that they had with others around them. And the effect of this brotherhood then is seen in Lebanon. It is seen on the plains of Iraq now. Cities in Iraq, Haji Imad was responsible for training guerrillas in Iraq, which led to the liberation of Iraq from the ISIS. So when Haji Qasim goes into Iraq, after Ayatollah Sistani gave the fatwa that one person from every household should volunteer. So there's an army that was ready. Haji Qasim goes into Iraq, but the first person he contacts is Sayyid Hassan, and he tells him, give me 200 army commanders from Hezbollah. So initially he leaves with 60 and the rest follow him. But it was these commanders who were trained by Haji Imad Mughniyeh. So they went there and they were the commanders of the army on the ground. Because when you have soldiers, it's not enough. You need leadership on the ground. And they were the ones who supervised. So Iraq, the way it is, every ziyarah that we go to, it is our duty to remember these great personalities. Haji Imad Mughniyeh, Haji Qasim Soleimani. It is because of them that ziyarah is possible today. And of course, Ayatollah Sistani. Not only in Iraq, but now we see the effects in Yemen. We see the effects in Syria. Syria never collapsed. Other Arab countries collapsed, but Syria never collapsed. They had the same problems as Libya. But the credit goes to the Lebanese soldiers who have been fighting, along with the Iranian soldiers who've been fighting with the Syrians to keep the enemies away. And same with whatever is happening today in Palestine. In Palestine, in Gaza, of course, the Hamas have taken over that part of Gaza. But West Bank, what is going on just now, is a big dilemma for the Israelis. You have this solo mujahideen just going out and carrying out operations. And credit is given to Hezbollah. Whenever, this is the enemy saying, these people have been trained by Hezbollah. The training has all come from there. And this is the front of the resistance. And it all goes to Haji Imad again. Not only there, but in the walls of the Kremlin, that visit of Haji Qasem Soleimani to the Kremlin, whereby he met Putin, convinced him to send an army to Syria, that was a game changer. So the effect of this brotherhood between Haji Imad, Haji Qasem, Sayyid Hassan, and Ayatollah Khamenei, you see these effects spreading around the world. And what is happening today, you hear of Putin talking about Russian values, talking about the East and West, talking about Russian values and the Western values. He was an atheist. He was a member of the KGB, no religion whatsoever. But now you see this transformation in this man. And there are some seeds that were planted. There was one letter that was written by Imam Khomeini, which was taken by Ayatollah Jawad Amuli to Gorbachev during those times. And the seeds of that, we see it today. And then the visit of Haji Qasim to the Kremlin, then visit of Putin to Iran, meeting with Rahbar, and you see him talking about values now. So the credit goes to these seeds that were planted. And lastly, the most important lesson. So why do we study personalities like Haji Imad? Why is it important for us to study the biography of people like him? When the date comes, when the day of martyrdom comes of these people, we should not forget them. Why? One of the main reasons is because of Zarat Ashura. In Zarat Ashura, twice it has been mentioned. وَتَقَرَّبُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ إِلَيْكُمْ بِمُوَالَاتِكُمْ وَمُوَالَاتِ وَلِيِّكُمْ. Twice this has been mentioned. By means of declaring loyalty to you and to your loyalists. Not only loyalists, not only to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, not loyalty to only Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but those who are loyal to him, not only in Karbala, but the people who are his loyalists even today. And it's our duty to know Imam Hussein alayhi salam on this auspicious day, but also to know people who are loyal to him. Yes, we have to try to be loyal ourselves. But knowing about those who are loyal to him is very important. Again, فَأَسَأَلُ اللَّهَ الَّذِي أَكْرَمَنِي. This karama, we had discussed about this. The purpose of our creation is karama, to be kareem. فَأَسَألُ اللَّهَ الَّذِي أَكْرَمَنِي بِمَعْرِفَتِكُمْ وَمَعْرِفَةِ أَوْلِيَائِكُمْ. So I beseech Allah, who has endued me with the honor of recognizing you, that is Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and recognizing your loyalists. So one of the main ways to attain karama, to attain honor, magnanimity, is to have the ma'rifah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but also to have the ma'rifah of those who are loyal to him. People who have walked in his footsteps. It's our duty to know more about them, to emulate them, to pray for them as much as possible, because it's a source of karama. So I want to end by reading out this letter of condolence that was written on the February 14th of 2008. So 2 days after the martyrdom of Haji Imad Mughniyeh, Ayatollah Khamenei writes a letter to Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah and giving him condolence. He says, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. And I want you to pay attention to the contents because these contents were given out in 2008, but the results are seen today. Says, dear brother Hujjatul Islam Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the martyrdom of our Mujahid, devoted and selfless brother Haji Imad Mughniyeh, who was full of enthusiasm to strive in the way of Allah, was a great victory and a prosperous end for him. The enemies were all celebrating, saying that it was a victory for them and a loss for Hezbollah. Here, they say, it's a victory for Haji Imad for having attained martyrdom and for all that he fought for. It is also a source of honor for the Lebanese nation. Rahbar is telling Sayyid Hassan, a nation that has given birth to such a great man and offered him to fight for freedom and resistance against oppression. Although loss of this free, prominent, selfless man is very painful for all honorable people and all those who knew him, especially for his parents, his wife, dear children, relatives and friends, the life and death of people like him are an epic that awaken nations. Death of this man has the capacity to awaken nations. It sets an example to the youth. It creates bright prospects and paves the way for achieving these prospects. The criminal and bloodthirsty Zionists must know that the holy blood of martyrs like Imad Mughniyeh create hundreds of other Mughniyahs. And this doubles the power of resistance against oppression, corruption and insurgency. Men like this honorable martyr gave up their peace and material possessions to defend the oppressed and fight against oppression and arrogance. And this is a highly valuable thing which makes the human conscience bow as a mark of respect. May Allah bestow paradise on him and all mujahideen who strive for the sake of righteousness. I hereby express my condolence and congratulations over this great martyrdom to you, his honorable family, the esteemed youth of Hezbollah, the resistance forces, and all the people of Lebanon. Greetings be upon him and you and Allah's mercy. Sayyid Ali Khamenei, February 14th, 2008. So a beautiful letter, congratulating, giving us condolence, but at the same time congratulating. Because now this man, for as long as he was living, he was serving humanity. But the moment he dies, according to the Quranic message, the shuhada never die. They are always living, but now they can work without boundaries. So the effects of this shaheed are seen even more, and we see it in our present day world. Whatever is happening just now in Palestine, the credits is definitely the hand of Haji Imad in this, and he's definitely working behind the scenes. So on this auspicious day, it's our duty to know more about our third holy Imam, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but more importantly, to know about the people who have made an effort to walk on his footsteps. Yes, there were people who were loyal to him 1400 years back, but there are people who have, in our time, who have done the same, who have walked in the footsteps of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. It's our duty to know about them, and it's enough. This information is enough. It should be enough to awaken our hearts, inshallah, to give us our goals in life and to make us better faithfuls, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.